Hey there everyone! This video is designed to help break down everything that you need to know to be successful on the School Leaders Licensure Assessment version 6990. My name is Jamie Stacy. I'm an educator with over 20 years of experience in K-12 education, and currently I teach people in administration and supervision programs. So before I begin the video, I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out to Slides Carnival, because this is the place I got the slides template from. If you ever need a professional looking set of slides really quickly, I would definitely bookmark this site. It's a really good one. So let's go ahead and talk about preparing for the SLLA. First and foremost, we'll talk about what it exactly is, why it exists. Then we'll talk about what things that you're going to be expecting on the School Leaders Licensure Assessment, as well as maybe some tools and tricks to use. And then last but not least, we'll talk about putting together a study plan that you can use that will help be successful on the assessment. So first and foremost, what exactly is the SLLA? Well, essentially, it is an assessment that many states use to assess the potential competency of a school administrator. And when I talk about the competency, the test itself is actually broken into two different sections. The first section is 120 selected response questions, and they're going to give you 165 minutes to take that section. So when I talk about competencies, it's going to measure strategic leadership, instructional leadership, climate and cultural leadership, ethical leadership, organizational leadership, and community engagement leadership. And the percentages next to each of those will tell you how much of the content of the test is going to be based on those competencies. Part 2 is going to be made up of 4 constructive response questions, and you'll have 75 minutes to do that, and then that's the other 25% of your assessment. So let's go ahead and talk about why it exists. Well, 15 states use the SLLA to assess based on national standards. And there are actually some states out there that require more than one assessment. So make sure that when you're pulling study materials for the School Leaders Licensure Assessment, make sure that you're pulling materials for the correct one. This video talks about version 6990 as it's based on the Professional Standards for Educational Leaders, which were developed in 2015 and made up of 10 different standards. Version 6011 is still out there, it's still being used, and it's based on the Interstate Leaders Licensure Consortium, which was developed the standards which were developed in 2008, and those are 6 standards. Now the PSEL basically are written to replace the ISLIC standards. However, the ISLIC standards do talk about a broader educational perspective, and there are a lot of states out there that use version 6011 because they also offer a different assessment, maybe for superintendents, or there are other reasons why they might still be using that particular assessment. So make sure when you're preparing for the correct version. All right, so a little bit more of a comparison between the two, because I think this is really important. The professional standards for educational leaders really take a deeper dive into what the ISLIC standards used to be. So whereas the ISLIC standards mentioned responding to a cultural context, the professional standards for educational leaders really want a administrator to be a true advocate for equity and cultural responsiveness within their buildings, and make sure that they have things in place to support equity and cultural responsiveness. Also, the professional standards indicate that a school leader really needs to make sure that they are developing the capacity and practice of the people that work within their school. Whereas the ISLIC standards basically want a school administrator to be mindful of creating a culture of lifelong learners. And then last but not least, the other big, I think the big difference between the professional standards and the ISLIC standards has to do with continuous improvement, a focus on continuous improvement, not just for the building, but also really making sure that you're reaching out to engage the community as well. Whereas the ISLIC standards talks about a broader vision of learning on a school division level. So let's go ahead and talk about that test. Like I said before, 120 selected response questions and 4 constructed response questions. Now, when you talk about selected response questions, notice I didn't say multiple choice. Yes, there are some multiple choice on that test. However, there are also answers where you may need to click and drag things, or sort things, or maybe it's asking you to choose more than one answer. There might be more than one correct answer to a particular question, or they may ask you to select something from a drop-down menu. Any of these things could be on the SLLA. Now for the constructed response, that's like the essay portion of the test. This is where the assessment is really going to see if you're understanding an issue that's presented in a scenario, and then if you have the knowledge to address that issue that's presented in the scenario, and also take into consideration different points of view that people might have if they're involved or stakeholders in that scenario, as well as having the knowledge to make sure that you're taking the right steps in the right order to address the issue. The constructed response section also wants to assess that you understand the role of the educational leader and that you're able to rationalize your response for any of the answers that you give. That's really, really important. So when you come across a constructed response question, it's really important to read the entire passage of that question carefully and to make sure that you're using the scratch paper to really outline your response, and then read the passage again and perform a double check to make sure you've got all of the components in that constructed response. When someone is grading the constructed response section, they're going to have a rubric right next to them, and that rubric's going to basically include all of the components of the question posed at the end of a scenario. So you use your scratch paper, you outline your response, you perform that double check, and then once you have all those things done, then it would be time to craft your actual response on the assessment. So there are basically 4 different scores that you could get on each constructed response question. It's a scale. You're either going to get a 3, a 2, a 1, or a 0. The 3, of course, is going to indicate that you have a real thorough understanding of the concept, whereas a 0 is going to indicate that, there really wasn't a lot of understanding of the concept there. They were really confused actually by what you wrote, so they really couldn't give you any credit at all. Most people, if anything, will get somewhere between a 1 and a 2, but if you, once again, double check all the components in that question and you answer them thoroughly and you answer them in a way that's organized, you can get that 3. So how can you prepare for this particular assessment? It's not necessarily something where you can study for specifically, but there are things that you can review and prepare for. And I think it's also really important that you maybe prepare more for the study skills. Like there are certain techniques that can use to kind of help you through the test. So in preparing for the school leader's licensure assessment, first and foremost, you're probably in an endorsement program that is based that has competencies based on these standards. So these are actually things that you've been learning throughout your educational career within the program. Secondly, you have someone in your building, I hope, that has been a mentor for you as an administrator. By all means, feel free when you're working with them, especially if you're doing some internship hours. Ask them the why to the decisions that they make, because that why is really important. Once again, like I said before, especially in the second portion of the assessment, you're really going to need to provide rationale for the decision that you made in addressing the scenario that they give you. Also, in the School Leaders Licensure Assessment Study Guide that's on the ETS website, there's a practice test. By all means, make sure that you take that practice test and score yourself honestly to make sure that you understand which questions you did really well on and then which questions that you might need to go ahead and work on. And then last but not least, once you do those things, then you put your plan of action together so that you have some benchmarks along the way to make sure that you're ready and prepared on the day of the assessment. So what would making a plan look like? Well, first and foremost, you want to go ahead and take a look at those content categories. Think about those percentages that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. Which of those categories do you feel you know really well, and which of those do you need to work on? Your mentor would be a really, really good person to ask those questions to. Say, hey, look, I'm going to read some content categories on the SLLA for you, and I want you to let me know which ones you think I know really well and which ones you think I need to work on a little bit more. And then Next, once you know what you need to work on, consider the resources that you have. Many of the textbooks from your schoolwork have direct correlations to the professional standards for educational leaders right in them. The other really good resource would be the published professional standards for educational leaders that you can actually find right on the internet. They're right out there for you. And then once you consider all your resources, you have your resources together to kind of help you prepare for the assessment, make sure that you're committing that time to review the resources that you have, and that you have a plan in place for reviewing that assessment. I think another really good suggestion is to have a deadline. When do you want to have all your materials reviewed? Maybe a couple days before the assessment. And then once you figure out what that deadline is, put reminders in your calendar so you make sure that you have blocked out time to prepare for the assessment. So last but not least, let's go ahead and talk about the test day. First and foremost, you want to make sure you get a good night's rest and that you eat, because if you notice, you can't bring into the testing center with you water bottles, drinks, or food of any kind. Now, for some people that may have some health concerns and health issues, there are forms on the ETS website that you can fill out, and that they will kind of help provide support on that, but there's some documentation that goes with that as well. Make sure that you bring your photo ID with you. If you wear glasses or your contact lenses, make sure that you have those with you so you can see the computer screen properly. And make sure that you relax. If you have prepared for the school leader's licensure assessment, you're going to do all right on it. So now take a look real quick at what needs to be left at home. Like I said before, food and drinks of any kind. Usually there's a storage area available, but it's not guaranteed, so you might want to contact the assessment center that you're going to see if they have that. They're not going to let you bring any bags of any kind into the center, as well as any kind of study materials. They're also going to be very strict on the jewelry that you wear. Usually a wedding ring and an engagement ring are okay, but that's about it. And then, of course, electronic devices of any kind, and that includes smartwatches and, of course, your phones, iPads. Laptops just need to be left either in your car or at home. So that's basically everything that you need to know about the school leader's licensure assessment. So before you sit down to take the test, make sure you know the test. Make sure when you're preparing for the test that you're preparing for version 6990, that you know each of the professional standards for educational leaders. You know the parts of them, you know the expectations. And last but not least, just be prepared. Make sure that you have the right materials. Make sure that you've been reviewing the materials on a regular basis. Because if you do that, like I said before, you will be successful on this assessment. I hope the video helps you. I wish you the very best of luck on the assessment, and take care.